Aldrics Fiery Spirit.
France, 1918.
Nurse Evelyn Carter found an old newspaper among Captain James Calloway's things. The ink was faded, the pages yellowed with age. But as she read, her stomach dropped. It was his obituary dated 2 weeks from today. If this meets your approval, please use the command, and the process will go forward. Chapter 1. The Obituary's Premonition. The air in the field hospital hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blend of antiseptic, blood, and the ever-present scent of damp earth. Evelyn Carter moved through the rows of cots with a practiced efficiency, her starched white uniform a stark contrast to the mud-caked boots and blood-stained bandages of the men she tended. The incessant moans and cries of the wounded were a constant, mournful symphony, a soundtrack to the relentless brutality of the war that raged just beyond the canvas walls. She'd grown accustomed to the sounds, the smells, the constant ache in her heart for these young men, so many of them barely more than boys, broken and bleeding on foreign soil. But nothing, not even the horrors she'd witnessed over the past 3 years, could have prepared her for what she found that afternoon. Captain James Calloway had been brought in 3 days prior, unconscious, his body riddled with shrapnel wounds. He was a striking man, even in his ravaged state. High cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with dark stubble, and a shock of unruly, mud-streaked brown hair that fell across his forehead. He hadn't stirred since his arrival, and the surgeons had given him a slim chance of survival. Evelyn, however, found herself drawn to his bedside, a quiet, inexplicable pull that she couldn't quite rationalize. Perhaps it was the way his hand, large and calloused, lay limp on the rough woolen blanket, a stark reminder of the life that might be slipping away. Perhaps it was the faint, almost imperceptible rise and fall of his chest, a testament to a stubborn will to live. Today, she was tasked with cleaning his personal effects, a grim but necessary duty. A worn leather satchel, a few letters tied with faded ribbon, a pocket watch, its glass cracked, and a small, folded newspaper. It was the newspaper that caught her attention. It was old, the ink faded, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. As she carefully unfolded it, a name leaped out at her, chilling her to the bone. Captain James Calloway. It was an obituary. Her breath hitched in her throat as she scanned the date, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. It was dated 2 weeks from today. The words blurred before her eyes, the formal, stilted language of the obituary a cruel mockery of the man lying before her. Died bravely in service of his country, a valiant officer, a tragic loss. It was a premonition, a glimpse into a future that seemed both impossible and terrifyingly real. She read it again and again, her mind struggling to reconcile the stark reality of the printed words with the faint pulse she could feel beneath her fingertips when she touched his wrist. The room seemed to spin, the sounds of the hospital fading into a distant hum. She felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a sense of impending doom that settled over her like a shroud. How could this be? Was it a cruel joke, a morbid prank played by a fellow soldier? Or was it something more, something inexplicable, a whisper from the other side? Evelyn had always been a woman of logic, of reason. She believed in science, in the tangible, in the things she could see and touch. But the war had changed her, chipping away at her certainty, forcing her to confront the fragility of life, the capricious nature of fate. She'd seen too much death, too much suffering, to dismiss this out of hand. She carefully refolded the newspaper, her hands trembling. The paper felt like ice against her skin. She tucked it back into the satchel, a secret too heavy to bear alone. She looked at Captain Calloway, his face pale and still, his breathing shallow. He seemed so vulnerable, so utterly defenseless against the fate that had seemingly been written for him. A sudden, fierce protectiveness surged through her. She didn't know this man, not really, but she felt a connection to him, a bond forged in the crucible of shared suffering, of the constant, unspoken understanding that existed between those who lived on the edge of death. She couldn't explain it, but she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she couldn't let him die. She wouldn't. The afternoon sun slanted through the canvas flaps of the hospital tent, casting long, dancing shadows across the rows of cots. The air was still heavy, the sounds of suffering still a constant presence. But something had shifted within Evelyn. The fear remained, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now tempered by a steely resolve, a determination that burned like a small, fierce flame in the darkness. She would fight for him. She would fight for his life, even if it meant defying fate itself. She would find a way. The next move was hers. And what a precarious, frightening move it would be. Chapter 2. Whispers across the ward. The following days passed in a blur of activity, a frantic dance against the ticking clock of Captain Calloway's predicted demise. Evelyn threw herself into her work with a renewed intensity, her every action fueled by a desperate hope and a growing sense of urgency. She monitored his vital signs obsessively, checking his pulse, his breathing, the subtle changes in his complexion that might offer a clue, a sign of improvement, or a dreaded warning of decline. She spoke to him. Even though he remained unconscious, her voice a low, soothing murmur in the cacophony of the ward. She told him about the weather, about the news from the front, about the small, everyday details of life that seemed so distant and precious in the midst of war. She also began to investigate, discreetly, cautiously. She questioned the other nurses, the orderlies, the doctors, anyone who might have had contact with Captain Calloway before his arrival at the field hospital. She framed her inquiries as general curiosity, a professional interest in a particularly challenging case. But her true motive was to uncover any shred of information, any detail, that might shed light on the mysterious obituary. He was a quiet one, Captain Calloway. Nurse Beatrice Morrow, a stout, matronly woman with a kind face and tired eyes, told her one evening. They were folding linens in the supply tent, the air thick with the scent of lavender and starch. Kept to himself, mostly. But I saw him once, writing in a small notebook. He looked troubled. Troubled? Evelyn prompted gently. Beatrice nodded, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And he had this intensity in his eyes, like he was seeing something that the rest of us couldn't. Another nurse, a young, fresh-faced girl named Elsie, chimed in. I heard he was a bit of a legend, daring raids behind enemy lines, that sort of thing. They say he had a charmed life. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Some even whispered he was touched by fate. The words sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. Touched by fate. Was that what the obituary meant? Was Captain Calloway a man destined to die, a pawn in some larger, incomprehensible game? Evelyn also learned that Captain Calloway was attached to a special intelligence unit, a secretive group that operated behind enemy lines, gathering information and carrying out covert operations. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the puzzle. Could the obituary be some kind of code, a message meant for someone else? Or was it a deliberate act of deception, a way to mislead the enemy? The more she learned, the more confused she became. The pieces didn't fit. The picture remained fragmented and incomplete. But one thing was clear. Captain Calloway was not just an ordinary soldier. He was a man shrouded in mystery, a man with secrets that might hold the key to his survival. Or his death. One afternoon, while changing Captain Calloway's bandages, Evelyn noticed a small, almost imperceptible scar on his left wrist. It was a thin, white line, barely visible against his tan skin. It looked old, like a childhood injury. But there was something about it, a faint, almost imperceptible irregularity, that caught her attention. She gently traced the scar with her fingertip, a sudden, intuitive feeling washing over her. This was more than just a scar. It was a mark, a symbol, a clue. As the days dwindled, Evelyn's determination grew stronger, even as her hope began to waver. She felt like she was running out of time, chasing shadows in a desperate race against an invisible enemy. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, the fear of failure a constant, gnawing presence. But she couldn't give up. She wouldn't. She had made a promise, a silent vow to the unconscious man in the cot before her. And she would keep it, no matter the cost. The whispers in the ward grew louder, the speculation about Captain Calloway's fate more intense. Some said he was already dead, his spirit lingering between worlds. Others whispered of miracles, of divine intervention. Evelyn ignored them all, focusing on the task at hand, on the faint, fragile thread of life that still connected him to this world. She would not let it break. Not while she still drew breath. The clock was ticking, and she knew she was in a battle not only for his life, but perhaps her soul. Chapter 3. A past etched in scars. Evelyn found herself spending more and more time at Captain Calloway's bedside, even when her duties didn't require it. She would sit beside him in the quiet hours of the night, the only sound the soft, rhythmic hiss of the gas lamps and the distant rumble of artillery fire. She would talk to him, sharing her thoughts, her fears, her hopes. She told him about her childhood in the English countryside, about her dreams of becoming a doctor, dreams that had been shattered by the war. She spoke of her brother, Thomas, who had been killed at the Somme, his death leaving a gaping hole in her heart. She found a strange comfort in these one-sided conversations, a sense of connection that transcended the boundaries of consciousness and language. It was as if, in sharing her own vulnerabilities, she was somehow reaching him, bridging the gap between the living and the near-dead. One night, while gently cleaning his face, she noticed a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of his eyelids. She held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Was it a sign? A glimmer of hope? She leaned closer, her face inches from his. "Captain Calloway?" She whispered. "Can you hear me?" There was no response, no further movement. But Evelyn felt a surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of purpose. He was still there, fighting. And she would fight with him. Driven by a renewed sense of urgency, Evelyn decided to take a risk. She knew that Captain Calloway's belongings had been thoroughly searched by the military authorities, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been missed, some crucial detail that might hold the key to the mystery. She decided to search his satchel again, this time with a more focused, more determined eye. She waited until the ward was quiet, the other nurses busy with their rounds. She carefully removed the items from the satchel, laying them out on a small table. The letters, tied with faded ribbon, were from his sister, Margaret. They were filled with news of home, of family, of the everyday details of life that seemed so distant and surreal in the midst of war. They painted a picture of a close-knit family, a loving bond that had been torn apart by the conflict. The pocket watch, its glass cracked, was a family heirloom, engraved with the initials JC and a date, 1898. It was a tangible link to his past, a reminder of a life before the war, a life of innocence and hope. And then there was the notebook. Nurse Moreau had mentioned it. Evelyn carefully opened it, her hands trembling. The pages were filled with Captain Calloway's handwriting, a neat, precise script that belied the chaos of the world around him. It was a journal, a record of his thoughts, his experiences, his observations. As she read, Evelyn began to piece together a picture of the man behind the uniform, the soldier behind the legend. He was a complex, introspective man, haunted by the horrors he had witnessed, burdened by the weight of his responsibilities. He wrote of his doubts, his fears, his struggles to reconcile his duty with his conscience. He wrote of the men he had lost, the friends he had buried, the lives he had taken. And then she found it, a passage, tucked away near the back of the notebook, that made her blood run cold. It was a description of a recurring dream, a nightmare that had plagued him for months. In the dream, he was standing in a field of poppies, the red flowers stretching as far as the eye could see. He was surrounded by the bodies of dead soldiers, their faces pale and lifeless. And in the distance, he saw a figure, a shadowy figure shrouded in mist. The figure was beckoning him, calling him to join them. The dream ended with a date, the same date as the obituary. Evelyn closed the notebook, her mind racing. The dream, the obituary, the scar, it was all connected, somehow. But how? She felt like she was on the verge of a breakthrough, a revelation that would unlock the mystery and save Captain Calloway's life. But she was missing a piece, a crucial element that would tie it all together. She returned to his bedside. He was still,
Pale.
his breathing was labored. She felt a pang of doubt, a wave of despair. It was almost the date. Was it too late? She took his hand. It felt surprisingly warm, and she held it tight, trying to will her own life force into his. She would not let go. She couldn't. The answer was close. She could sense it. She just needed to hold on for just a while longer. Chapter 4. The Dance of Defiance. The next day dawned gray and ominous, the sky heavy with a threat of rain. The air in the hospital was thick with tension, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging over the ward.
It was the day.
The day the obituary had foretold Captain Calloway's death. Evelyn moved through her duties with a mechanical precision, her mind focused on a single, unwavering goal, keeping him alive. She checked his vital signs every hour, her fingers hovering over his pulse point, her ears straining for the sound of his breathing. She administered his medication, changed his bandages, whispered words of encouragement into his unresponsive ear. The other nurses watched her with a mixture of pity and concern. They knew about the obituary, of course. The whispers had spread like wildfire through the hospital. Some thought she was delusional, clinging to a false hope. Others admired her tenacity, her unwavering dedication to her patient. Dr. Morrow, Beatrice's husband, a gruff but kind-hearted man who had seen his share of death and suffering, approached her in the late morning. "Evelyn," he said gently, "you need to rest. You've been at his side for days. You're exhausted." Evelyn shook her head. "I can't, doctor. Not yet. I won't leave him." He sighed, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. "I understand, but you must be prepared. There's nothing more we can do." "There's always something more," Evelyn insisted, her voice firm, unwavering. "I won't give up. Not until it's over." Dr. Morrow placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support and understanding. "You're a remarkable woman, Evelyn. A true angel of mercy." As the day wore on, the atmosphere in the ward grew increasingly tense. The other patients, sensing the drama unfolding around them, were unusually quiet, their eyes fixed on Captain Calloway's cot. The nurses moved about with a hushed urgency, their faces etched with concern. Evelyn remained at his side, a constant, unwavering presence. She held his hand, her fingers intertwined with his. She spoke to him, her voice a low, soothing murmur, telling him stories, sharing memories, whispering promises. She talked about the future, a future they might never share. She spoke of walking along a beach, the sun warm on their skin, the sound of the waves a soothing balm. She spoke of dancing, of laughing, of living. She painted a picture of a life beyond the war, a life of peace and happiness. As the afternoon sun began to fade, casting long, eerie shadows across the ward, Evelyn felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. She gasped, her hand flying to her heart. It was a fleeting sensation, a momentary twinge, but it left her shaken. She looked at Captain Calloway, his face pale and still, his breathing shallow and uneven. She felt a wave of despair wash over her, a crushing sense of defeat. She had failed. She had tried everything, and she had failed. The obituary had been right all along. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She whispered a silent prayer, a plea for a miracle, a desperate cry for help. And then she felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible pressure on her hand. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. Captain Calloway's fingers were twitching, ever so slightly. He was squeezing her hand. She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. He was alive. He was fighting. And he was winning. A surge of joy, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude washed over her. She had done it. She had defied fate. She had saved his life. He opened his eyes, slowly, painfully. He looked at her, his gaze unfocused, confused. "Evelyn?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm here. I'm here." He smiled, a faint, fleeting smile that lit up his face. And then, he closed his eyes again, drifting back into unconsciousness. But this time, it was different. This time, it was a peaceful sleep, a healing sleep. He would live. The relief was so potent, she nearly collapsed.
But why now?
What had changed? It felt like a miracle, but Evelyn knew, deep down, there was more to the story. Chapter 5. Letters from a Ghost. Captain Calloway's recovery was slow and arduous, a gradual climb back from the brink of death. He remained weak and fragile, his body ravaged by the wounds he had sustained. But his spirit was strong, his will to live unwavering. And Evelyn was there every step of the way, guiding him, supporting him, nursing him back to health. As he regained consciousness, he had no memory of the obituary, of the dream, of the events that had led to his near-fatal injury. He remembered the mission, the ambush, the explosion, and then nothing. A blank void, a darkness that had almost claimed him. Evelyn decided not to tell him about the obituary. Not yet. She feared it would only add to his burden, to the trauma he had already endured. She wanted him to focus on his recovery, on regaining his strength, on rebuilding his life. But the mystery of the obituary continued to haunt her. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a coincidence, more than just a bizarre premonition. There was something else, something hidden, something that she needed to uncover. She revisited his journal, searching for clues, for any detail that might shed light on the puzzle. She reread the passage about the recurring dream, the field of poppies, the shadowy figure. She studied the date, the same date as the obituary. And then she noticed something she had missed before. A small, almost imperceptible inscription on the inside cover of the journal. It was a single word, Veritas.
Truth.
Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Veritas. It was the motto of Captain Calloway's intelligence unit. It was a clue, a starting point. She decided to contact Captain Calloway's sister, Margaret. She had read her letters. She knew she was a strong, intelligent woman. She might be able to help. She wrote to Margaret, carefully crafting her words, explaining her role as Captain Calloway's nurse, expressing her concern for his well-being. She mentioned the journal, the inscription, the dream. She asked if Margaret knew anything about the obituary, about any enemies her brother might have made, about any secrets he might have been keeping. The reply came a week later, a long, detailed letter filled with information and insights. Margaret confirmed that Veritas was indeed the motto of her brother's unit. She also revealed that James had been working on a highly sensitive mission, investigating a possible leak within the British intelligence network. He had suspected a double agent, a traitor who was feeding information to the enemy. And then, Margaret dropped a bombshell. She had received a letter from James, a letter that had been written just days before his injury. In the letter, James had expressed his fears, his suspicions, his belief that he was being followed, that his life was in danger. He had also mentioned a coded message, a message that he had hidden within a newspaper obituary. He had instructed Margaret to retrieve the newspaper, to decipher the message, and to deliver it to a trusted contact within the intelligence service. The newspaper, Margaret explained, was a specific edition, a specific date. The same date as the obituary Evelyn had found. Evelyn's mind raced. The obituary wasn't a premonition. It was a message. A coded message, hidden in plain sight. James Calloway had written his own obituary, not as a prediction of his death, but as a means of communication, a way to expose the traitor. But he had been injured before he could complete his mission. The message had remained undelivered, the traitor unexposed. Evelyn now understood the urgency, the desperate need to decipher the message. She had to finish what Captain Calloway had started. She had to expose the traitor and bring them to justice. It wasn't just about saving Captain Calloway's life anymore. It was about saving countless others, about protecting the integrity of the Allied war effort. She looked over at him, sleeping soundly in his bed. The weight of this newfound knowledge was immense. And the risks were terrifying. But she was the only one who could do it. Chapter 6. The Unspoken Bond. As Captain Calloway continued to recover, a subtle but profound shift occurred in his relationship with Evelyn. The formal distance between nurse and patient began to dissolve, replaced by a growing intimacy, a shared understanding that transcended words. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, exchanging confidences. He learned about her life, her dreams, her losses. She learned about his past, his fears, his hopes for the future. He told her about his childhood in Scotland, about his love of the rugged landscape, of the wild, untamed beauty of the Highlands. He spoke of his father, a stern but loving man who had instilled in him a strong sense of duty, of honor, of loyalty. He spoke of his mother, a gentle, compassionate woman who had taught him the importance of kindness, of empathy, of love. He also spoke of the war, of the horrors he had witnessed, of the burden he carried. He confessed his doubts, his fears, his struggles to reconcile his duty with his conscience. He admitted that he had often felt lost, alone, adrift in a sea of violence and despair. Evelyn listened, her heart aching for him. She understood his pain, his struggle, his longing for peace. She had seen it in so many of the men she had cared for, the invisible wounds that the war had inflicted, the scars that ran deeper than any physical injury. She, in turn, shared her own experiences, her own vulnerabilities. She spoke of her brother, Thomas, of the grief that still haunted her, of the guilt she felt for surviving when he had not. She spoke of her dreams of becoming a doctor, dreams that had been deferred, perhaps forever, by the war. As they talked, they discovered a shared passion, a common ground that connected them on a deeper level. They both loved literature, poetry, music. They both believed in the power of the human spirit, in the resilience of hope, in the enduring strength of love. They also began to share silences, comfortable, companionable silences that spoke volumes. They would sit together, watching the sunset, listening to the rain, holding hands. The touch of their skin, the warmth of their presence, was a source of comfort, of reassurance, of connection. One evening, as they were sitting on the small veranda outside the hospital, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Captain Calloway turned to Evelyn, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that made her heart flutter. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I owe you my life. You saved me. You never gave up on me." Evelyn smiled, her eyes meeting his. "You saved yourself, Captain. You were the one who fought. I just helped." "No," he insisted, his voice firm. "It was more than that. You gave me something to fight for. You gave me hope." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The touch sent a shiver down her spine, a jolt of electricity that ignited a spark within her. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. You've changed me, Evelyn. You've shown me that there's still beauty in the world, even in the midst of all this darkness." Evelyn felt her cheeks flush, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt this way before, this intense, overwhelming connection to another human being. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She began, but she couldn't find the words. She didn't need to. He understood. He leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. And then, he did something that took her breath away. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air, a silent declaration that changed everything. Evelyn felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of joy, fear, and disbelief. She had fallen in love with him, too. She knew it deep down. But she had been afraid to admit it to herself, to him. The war, the uncertainty, the danger, it had all seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. But now, in this moment, none of that mattered. Only he did. The world outside faded, and she knew it was a fragile, dangerous bubble. But she would cling to it, for as long as she could. Chapter 7. Beneath a Sky of Shells. The declaration of love, unspoken but palpable, hung between them like a fragile, precious thing. They didn't speak of it again, not immediately. They didn't need to. It was there, in their eyes, in their touch, in the quiet moments they shared. But the war, ever present, ever demanding, intruded upon their newfound intimacy. Captain Calloway's recovery, while steady, was still incomplete. He was regaining his strength, but he was not yet fit for duty. And Evelyn, despite her personal feelings, remained his nurse, bound by her professional obligations. The front lines were shifting, the fighting intensifying. The hospital was overflowing with wounded soldiers, the air thick with the sounds of suffering. Evelyn was working longer hours, her days and nights a blur of bandages, blood, and broken bodies. She found solace in the brief moments she could steal with Captain Calloway, the stolen glances across the crowded ward, the whispered conversations in the quiet hours of the night. These moments were a lifeline, a reminder of the beauty and hope that still existed in the world, even amidst the carnage. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Evelyn found Captain Calloway sitting on the veranda, gazing out at the distant horizon. The sky was ablaze with the fiery glow of artillery fire, the air trembling with the constant rumble of explosions. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. They didn't speak for a long time, simply watching the spectacle of destruction unfold before them. The beauty and the horror, so closely intertwined. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" Captain Calloway said softly, his voice barely audible above the din of the war. The power, the destruction, Evelyn nodded, her heart aching. "It is. But it's also strangely beautiful. Like a storm. A terrible, beautiful storm." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "You see beauty in everything, Evelyn. Even in this." She smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "I try to. It's the only way to survive. To find the light in the darkness." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The touch was electric, a spark of warmth in the cold, harsh reality of their surroundings. "I'm afraid," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "Afraid of going back. Afraid of dying." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart filled with compassion. "I know. But you're not alone. I'm here. And I'll be here, no matter what." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude, and something that made her heart flutter. "Thank you, Evelyn. For everything." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, their hands clasped together, their shoulders touching. The sky above them continued to explode with light and fire, the ground trembling beneath their feet. But in that small, quiet space, they found a moment of peace, a moment of connection, a moment of love. Suddenly, a shell exploded nearby, shaking the ground violently. Evelyn and Captain Calloway instinctively ducked, their bodies pressed together. The air filled with dust and debris, the sounds of screams and shouts echoing around them. When the dust settled, they looked at each other, their eyes wide with fear and relief. They were both unharmed. But the close call served as a stark reminder of the fragility of their existence, of the ever-present danger that surrounded them. "We need to go inside," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "It's not safe here." Captain Calloway nodded, his face pale. He stood up, his legs still weak, and helped Evelyn to her feet. They walked back into the hospital, their arms around each other, seeking comfort and reassurance in a shared embrace. As they walked, Evelyn realized that their love, born in the midst of war, was a fragile and precious thing. It was a beacon of hope in a world of darkness, a source of strength in a time of weakness. But it was also vulnerable, exposed to the dangers and uncertainties of their reality. She had a job to do. Decipher the message. But how, amidst the chaos? And what if she was wrong? The question swirled, as shells continued to fall, a grim reminder of the stakes. Chapter 8. Echoes of a Forgotten Life. The near miss with the shell had shaken them both, a stark reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Captain Calloway, though physically recovering, was visibly more withdrawn, the shadows of his past returning to haunt him. Evelyn, burdened by the secret of the obituary and the coded message, found it increasingly difficult to maintain the facade of normalcy. She decided she could wait no longer. She needed to decipher the message, and she needed to do it soon. She retrieved the newspaper from Captain Calloway's satchel, the brittle paper feeling like a ticking bomb in her hands. She found a quiet corner in the supply tent, away from prying eyes, and spread the obituary out on a table. The words stared back at her, formal and impersonal, seemingly innocuous. But she knew, thanks to Margaret's letter, that there was a hidden message embedded within the text, a code that only a select few could decipher. James had told Margaret it was a simple substitution cipher, using a keyword known only to him and his trusted contact. Evelyn racked her brain, trying to recall any conversations she'd had with Captain Calloway, any hints he might have dropped, any clues that might reveal the keyword. She thought about his journal, his motto, Veritas. Could that be it? She tried substituting the letters of Veritas for the letters in the obituary, following a predetermined pattern that Margaret had described in her letter. It was a tedious, painstaking process, requiring intense concentration and meticulous attention to detail. Hours passed, and Evelyn's eyes grew tired. Her head ached. She was about to give up, to concede defeat, when she noticed a pattern emerging. A few words began to form, disjointed and fragmented, but recognizable nonetheless. Agent Betrayal double supply lines. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was on the right track. She continued to decipher the message, letter by letter, word by word, the puzzle slowly coming together. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the complete message was revealed. It was a chilling revelation, a confirmation of Captain Calloway's worst fears. Double agent within high command. Codename, Nightingale. Disrupting supply lines to Amiens. Immediate action required. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Nightingale. The codename sent a shiver down her spine. She had heard whispers of Nightingale, a shadowy figure, a master of deception, a traitor who had eluded capture for months. And now she knew the target, Amiens, a crucial strategic point, a vital supply hub for the Allied forces. She carefully folded the newspaper, her hands trembling. She had the message.
But what now?
Who could she trust? She couldn't go to the military authorities, not without risking exposure to Nightingale, who was, according to the message, someone in high command. She thought of Dr. Moreau, Beatrice's husband. He was a good man, a trusted colleague. But he was also a civilian, not privy to the inner workings of military intelligence. She thought of Margaret, Captain Calloway's sister. But she was in England, far from the front lines, unable to act quickly. And then, she thought of Captain Calloway himself. He was still weak, still recovering. But he was also the one who had written the message, the one who knew the most about the situation. He was the only one she could truly trust. She knew it was a risk, a dangerous gamble. He was not yet fully recovered, and the shock of the news could set him back. But she had no choice. She had to tell him. She found him sitting in his bed, staring out the window, his face etched with a mixture of sadness and determination. She sat beside him, her heart heavy with the burden of what she was about to reveal. She looked at him, this brave, broken man, and knew she had to do it, no matter the consequences. This secret, this knowledge, it was too heavy and too dangerous. Chapter 9. The Weight of a Promise. Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation to come. The weight of the secret, the potential consequences of revealing it, pressed down on her, a suffocating burden. But she knew she couldn't keep it from Captain Calloway any longer. James, she began softly, her voice trembling slightly. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet concern. There's something I need to tell you. Something important. He searched her face, his gaze intense and unwavering. What is it, Evelyn? What's wrong? She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how he would react, how he would handle the truth. But she had to trust him. She had to believe in him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded newspaper, the brittle paper crackling in the silence. She handed it to him, her hand shaking. This was in your satchel, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I found it when I was cleaning your belongings. He took the newspaper, his brow furrowed in confusion. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the page. And then he saw it. His own obituary. His face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief. He stared at the words, his mouth agape, his breath catching in his throat. What is this? He stammered, his voice hoarse and strained.
How?
Evelyn explained everything, her voice trembling with emotion. She told him about finding the obituary, about her initial fear, her investigation, her conversations with the other nurses. She told him about Margaret's letter, about the coded message, about Nightingale. As she spoke, Captain Calloway's expression changed, shifting from shock and disbelief to anger and determination. He listened intently, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the obituary. The weight of the revelation, the implications of the betrayal, seemed to crush him. Nightingale, he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of rage and despair. I knew it. I suspected it. But I couldn't prove it. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes filled with a newfound respect and gratitude. You deciphered the message? You did this? Evelyn nodded, her heart swelling with pride and relief. Yes. With Margaret's help. She explained the code. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. His grip was strong, reassuring. You're incredible, Evelyn. You saved my life, and now you may have saved countless others. He paused, his gaze shifting back to the obituary. Amiens, he said, his voice grim. We have to warn them. We have to stop Nightingale. Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. But how? Who can we trust? Captain Calloway thought for a moment, his mind racing. There's one person, he said finally. Major Alistair Finch. He's with the intelligence unit. He's a good man, a trusted colleague. I worked with him before the mission. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes pleading. Evelyn, I need your help. I'm not strong enough to go myself. You have to go to Amiens. You have to find Major Finch. You have to deliver the message. Evelyn's heart sank. The thought of leaving Captain Calloway, of venturing into the unknown, of facing the danger alone, terrified her. But she knew he was right. She was the only one who could do it. I will, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. I promise. He smiled, a weak but genuine smile that lit up his face. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for everything. He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that sealed their promise, their bond, their shared commitment to a cause greater than themselves. It was a kiss that spoke of love, of trust, of hope. And it was a kiss that might be their last. The weight of what she had to do settled in. But she had made a promise, a vow. And she would not break it. Chapter 10.
Stulen moments, stulen kisses.
The decision made, a plan began to form, fraught with danger and uncertainty. Leaving the relative safety of the field hospital, even with Captain Calloway's blessing and a hastily scribbled note of introduction to Major Finch, felt like stepping into a storm. Evelyn knew the risks. She was a nurse, not a spy. But the urgency of the message, the potential consequences of failure, propelled her forward. Captain Calloway, despite his weakened state, insisted on helping her prepare. He provided her with a detailed map of Amiens, marking the location of Major Finch's headquarters, a seemingly innocuous bakery near the train station. He also gave her a small, silver locket, a family heirloom. Wear this, he said, his voice hoarse. It's a good luck charm. It's been in my family for generations. Evelyn took the locket, her fingers closing around it. It felt warm, a tangible connection to him, a reminder of his love and his trust. I'll keep it safe, she promised, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, a weak but genuine smile. And I'll be waiting for you, right here. They spent the remaining hours before her departure together, stealing precious moments in the quiet corners of the hospital. They talked, they held hands, they shared whispered confidences. They avoided speaking of the danger, of the uncertainty, focusing instead on the hope, on the possibility of a future together. They found a secluded spot in the hospital garden, a small, overgrown patch of flowers that had somehow survived the constant shelling. They sat on a weathered stone bench, their shoulders touching, their hands clasped together. "Do you remember," Captain Calloway said softly, "when you told me about your dream of becoming a doctor?" Evelyn nodded, her heart aching with a bittersweet longing. "Yes. It seems like a lifetime ago." "It's not too late," he said, his voice firm. "When this is all over, when we're back home, you can still pursue your dream." Evelyn smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "And what about you, James? What will you do?" He thought for a moment, his gaze drifting towards the distant horizon. "I don't know. Maybe I'll go back to Scotland. To the Highlands. To the peace and quiet." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "And maybe you'll come with me." Evelyn's heart fluttered. The thought of a life with him, a life beyond the war, filled her with a joy she had almost forgotten was possible. "I would like that," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that deepened with a growing passion. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of desire, of a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and fear, of promises and uncertainties. As the time for her departure drew near, a sense of dread settled over them both. They clung to each other, their embrace a desperate attempt to hold onto the moment, to ward off the inevitable separation. "Be careful, Evelyn," Captain Calloway whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "Please be careful." "I will," she promised, her voice trembling. "And you stay strong. I'll be back. I promise." She kissed him one last time, a lingering kiss that conveyed all the unspoken words, all the unfulfilled dreams, all the love that bound them together. Then, she turned and walked away, her heart heavy with a mixture of fear and determination. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She had a mission to complete, a promise to keep. And she would not fail. Not now. Not ever. The stolen moments, the stolen kisses, they were all she had to hold on to. And she would, with every fiber of her being. Chapter 11. The Price of Hope. Evelyn's journey to Amiens was a harrowing ordeal, a blur of crowded trains, checkpoints, and the constant, gnawing fear of discovery. She clutched Captain Calloway's note and the locket, her talismans against the dangers that lurked around every corner. The closer she got to her destination, the more palpable the tension became. The streets of Amiens were teeming with soldiers, the air thick with the sounds of war. She followed Captain Calloway's instructions meticulously, navigating the maze of narrow streets and alleys, her senses on high alert. She finally located the bakery, a small, unassuming shop with a faded sign and dusty windows. It looked deserted, abandoned. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Was this the right place? Had she made a mistake? She took a deep breath, steeling her nerves, and pushed open the door. The interior of the bakery was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale bread and dust. The shelves were bare, the counters empty. It looked like no one had been there in weeks. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone here?" There was no response. Only silence. She was about to turn and leave, convinced that she had made a mistake, when she heard a noise. A faint, almost imperceptible rustling sound coming from the back of the shop. She froze, her senses on high alert. She slowly moved towards the sound, her hand reaching into her pocket, clutching the small, sharp scalpel she had taken from the hospital supplies. She pushed aside a heavy curtain that separated the front of the shop from the back room. And there, in the dim light, she saw him. A man, slumped in a chair, his head lolling to one side. He was dressed in a military uniform, but it was torn and blood-stained. He was unconscious, barely alive. Evelyn rushed to his side, her heart sinking. It was Major Finch. He had been shot. She quickly assessed his injuries, her medical training kicking in. He had a gunshot wound to the chest, a serious injury but not necessarily fatal. He was losing blood rapidly, but his pulse was still relatively strong. She knew she had to act fast. She couldn't take him back to the field hospital. It was too far, too dangerous. She had to treat him here, with whatever limited supplies she could find. She searched the back room, frantically looking for anything that might be useful. She found a few old bandages, some dirty rags, a bottle of cloudy liquid that might be some kind of antiseptic. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wound, stemming the bleeding, bandaging his chest. She spoke to him constantly, her voice soothing and reassuring, even though he remained unconscious. As she worked, she noticed something clutched in Major Finch's hand. A small, crumpled piece of paper. She carefully pried it from his grasp, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a note, written in a hurried scrawl. It was addressed to Captain Calloway. Nightingale identified General Dubois meeting tomorrow, midnight, Old Church. Evelyn's blood ran cold. General Dubois, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Allied command. He was Nightingale, the traitor. And he was meeting with someone tomorrow night at the Old Church. This was it. This was the opportunity to expose him, to stop him. But Major Finch was in no condition to do anything. And Evelyn, she was just a nurse. She couldn't possibly confront a general, a traitor, a man who had the power to destroy everything. But she had to. She had made a promise to Captain Calloway. She had to complete the mission. She had to stop Nightingale. She was also running out of time. She looked at Major Finch, his face pale and still, his breathing shallow and uneven. He was alive, but barely. She had done all she could for him. She had to leave him. She had to go to the church. She had to face Dubois. The price of hope, she realized, was sometimes terrifyingly high. And she was about to pay it. Chapter 12. A Revelation in the Ruins. The old church stood on the outskirts of Amiens, a crumbling, forgotten relic of a bygone era. Its roof was partially collapsed, its windows shattered, its walls scarred by shrapnel. It was a desolate, eerie place, a fitting setting for a clandestine meeting, a betrayal. Evelyn approached the church cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. The only sound was the distant rumble of artillery fire, a constant reminder of the war that raged around her. She had left Major Finch in the bakery, hidden in the back room, hoping that someone would find him, that he would survive. She had done all she could for him. Her duty now was to Captain Calloway, to the mission, to stopping Nightingale. She slipped through a gap in the crumbling wall, her senses on high alert. The interior of the church was dark and cavernous, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the shattered windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. She moved slowly, silently, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. She scanned the shadows, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of the presence of others. She found a hiding place behind a fallen pillar, a vantage point that offered a clear view of the main altar where she assumed the meeting would take place. She crouched down, her body pressed against the cold stone, her hand clutching the scalpel in her pocket. She waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old building, the distant sounds of war. And then she heard it, the sound of footsteps, approaching slowly, cautiously. She held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden in the darkness. They walked towards the altar, their voices hushed, their movements furtive. One of the figures was tall and imposing, dressed in the uniform of a high-ranking officer. Evelyn recognized him immediately. General Dubois. The other figure was smaller, slimmer, shrouded in a dark cloak. Evelyn couldn't see their face, couldn't identify them. They stopped at the altar, facing each other. Dubois spoke, his voice low and menacing. "You have the information?" The other figure nodded, their voice a muffled whisper. "Yes, General. The plans, the troop movements, the supply routes, everything." They handed Dubois a small package, a sealed envelope. He took it, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Excellent," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "With this, the victory will be ours. The Allies will be crushed. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She had to act. She had to stop them. She stood up, her body trembling, her hand tightening around the scalpel. She stepped out from behind the pillar, her voice ringing out in the silence. "General Dubois," she shouted. "You are a traitor. I know who you are. I know what you've done." Dubois and the cloaked figure whirled around, their eyes widening in surprise. Dubois's face contorted in rage. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice booming. "What is the meaning of this?" "I am Evelyn Carter," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I am a nurse, and I am here to stop you." The cloaked figure suddenly moved, lunging towards Evelyn with surprising speed. They pulled out a knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. Evelyn reacted instinctively, raising her scalpel to defend herself. A struggle ensued, a desperate fight for survival in the darkness of the ruined church. As they grappled, Evelyn managed to rip the cloak from the figure's face. And then she saw it. A face she recognized, a face that made her blood run cold. It was Nurse Beatrice Morrow. The revelation stunned her, a blow to the gut that took her breath away. Beatrice, her friend, her colleague, the kind, matronly woman who had comforted her, who had helped her, she was Nightingale. Beatrice lunged again, the knife flashing towards Evelyn's throat. The betrayal was so shocking, so complete, that it was almost paralyzing. Almost. The fight, the struggle, had only just begun. And the stakes, Evelyn realized, were even higher than she had imagined. Chapter 13. The line between duty and desire. The shock of Beatrice's betrayal momentarily paralyzed Evelyn, leaving her vulnerable to the older woman's attack. The knife grazed her arm, a searing pain that jolted her back to reality. Adrenaline surged through her, sharpening her senses, fueling her fight for survival. "Beatrice, why?" Evelyn gasped, dodging another thrust of the blade. Beatrice's face was contorted in a snarl, her eyes filled with a chilling mixture of hatred and desperation. "You shouldn't have interfered, Evelyn. You should have stayed out of it." "But you were my friend," Evelyn cried, her voice filled with anguish. "I trusted you." "Friendship?" Beatrice scoffed, her voice dripping with venom. "There are no friends in war, Evelyn. Only enemies and allies. And you chose the wrong side." Their struggle continued, a desperate dance of death in the darkness of the ruined church. Evelyn, despite her smaller size and lack of combat training, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and betrayal. She used the scalpel defensively, parrying Beatrice's attacks, trying to disarm her. Dubois watched the struggle with a cold, detached amusement, his eyes gleaming with a sadistic pleasure. He made no move to intervene, content to let the two women fight it out. "You're a fool, Evelyn," Beatrice hissed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You can't win. Dubois has powerful allies. He's untouchable." "I don't care," Evelyn retorted, her voice trembling with anger and determination. "I won't let you betray any more soldiers. I won't let you destroy any more lives." With a sudden surge of strength, Evelyn managed to knock the knife from Beatrice's hand. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the silence. But Beatrice was not defeated. She lunged at Evelyn, her hands clawing at her face, her nails digging into her skin. Evelyn cried out in pain, her vision blurring. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a loose stone. She fell, her head hitting the hard floor with a sickening thud. Darkness closed in, a swirling vortex of pain and confusion. She felt Beatrice's weight on top of her, her hands closing around her throat. She struggled, feebly, her lungs burning, her vision fading. She was losing consciousness.
She was going to die.
And then a shot rang out. Beatrice's body went limp, her weight collapsing on top of Evelyn. A figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette against the faint moonlight. It was Captain Calloway. He stood over them, his arm outstretched, a pistol still smoking in his hand. He had come. He had saved her. He gently pulled Beatrice's body off Evelyn, his face filled with concern. He knelt beside her, his hands cradling her face. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice hoarse and strained. "Are you all right?" Evelyn opened her eyes, her vision slowly returning. She saw his face, his beloved face, filled with worry and relief. "James," she whispered, her voice weak and trembling. You came." He smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "I promised I'd be waiting. But I couldn't just wait. I had to come." He helped her to her feet, his arms supporting her. She leaned against him, her body trembling, her mind reeling from the events that had just transpired. Du Bois, seeing his accomplice defeated, his plans foiled, made a desperate attempt to escape. He scrambled to his feet and ran towards the entrance of a church. But Captain Calloway, despite his weakened state, was too quick for him. He raised his pistol and fired again. Du Bois stumbled, clutching his leg, and fell to the ground. He was captured. The nightmare was over. Evelyn and Captain Calloway stood together, in the ruins of the old church, beneath a sky that was beginning to lighten with the first rays of dawn. They had survived. They had won. But the line between duty and desire had blurred, forever changed by the events of that night. And the cost, the emotional toll, was yet to be fully realized. Chapter 14. Shadows of Betrayal. The aftermath of the confrontation at the church was a chaotic mix of relief, exhaustion, and the lingering sting of betrayal. Du Bois was taken into custody, his treachery exposed, his network of spies dismantled. Beatrice, miraculously still alive despite the gunshot wound, was taken to the field hospital where she would face justice for her crimes. Evelyn, treated for her injuries, found herself caught between the relief of survival and the devastating realization of Beatrice's duplicity. The woman she had considered a friend, a mentor, had been a ruthless enemy, willing to sacrifice countless lives for her own twisted cause. The thought haunted her, casting a long shadow over her victory. Captain Calloway, despite his weakened condition, remained by Evelyn's side, his presence a constant source of comfort and strength. He had defied his own recovery, risking his life to save hers, a testament to the depth of his love and his unwavering commitment to her. But even his presence couldn't fully dispel the darkness that had settled over her. The betrayal had cut deep, shaking her faith in humanity, leaving her questioning everything she thought she knew. How could she? Evelyn asked Captain Calloway one evening as they sat together in the hospital garden. How could she do those things? She was a nurse. She was supposed to care for people to save lives. Captain Calloway took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I don't know, Evelyn. War, it changes people. It twists them. It makes them do things they would never have imagined themselves capable of. But she seemed so normal, Evelyn continued, her voice filled with anguish. So kind, so compassionate, that was the deception, Captain Calloway said softly. That was how she operated. She used her position, her reputation, to gain trust to betray. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the distant horizon. I've seen it before, Evelyn. The war, it brings out the best in some people and the worst in others. It blurs the lines between good and evil, between right and wrong. Evelyn sighed, her heart heavy with sadness. I can't understand it. I can't wrap my head around it. You don't have to, Captain Calloway said gently. Just try to focus on the good, on the lives you saved, on the difference you made. He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that conveyed his love, his support, his unwavering belief in her. But even his kiss couldn't fully erase the shadows of betrayal that lingered in her heart. She knew that it would take time, a long time, to heal from the wounds that Beatrice had inflicted. As the days passed, Evelyn began to slowly process the events, to come to terms with the reality of Beatrice's treachery. She found solace in her work, in caring for the wounded soldiers, in helping them to heal. She also found strength in her relationship with Captain Calloway, in the love that had blossomed between them amidst the chaos of war. But the shadows of betrayal remained, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of human nature, a darkness that could corrupt even the most seemingly innocent of hearts. She knew that the scars would remain, a permanent part of her, a reminder of the price of trust, of the fragility of friendship, of the enduring power of evil. The world, she realized, was a more complicated, more dangerous place than she had ever imagined. Chapter 15. The Heart's Reckoning. The arrest of General Dubois and Beatrice Moreau sent ripples throughout the Allied command, causing a mixture of shock, outrage, and a renewed determination to root out any remaining vestiges of treachery. Investigations were launched, security measures were tightened, and a sense of unease settled over the ranks. For Evelyn and Captain Calloway, the aftermath was a time of reckoning, a period of reflection and healing. They had survived the ordeal, they had exposed the traitors, they had saved countless lives. But the experience had left them scarred, both physically and emotionally. Evelyn, while hailed as a hero, struggled with the emotional fallout of Beatrice's betrayal. She found it difficult to trust, to form new relationships, to believe in the goodness of others. She withdrew into herself, her usual warmth and compassion replaced by a guarded caution. Captain Calloway, still recovering from his injuries, watched Evelyn struggle with a growing concern. He understood her pain, her disillusionment, her need to protect herself. But he also knew that she couldn't isolate herself forever, that she needed to find a way to heal, to move forward. He tried to reach her, to break through the walls she had erected around herself. He spent hours talking to her, sharing his own experiences, his own struggles with the darkness of war. He reminded her of her strength, her resilience, her unwavering commitment to helping others. "Evelyn," he said one evening, as they sat together in the hospital garden, "you can't let Beatrice's actions define you. You can't let her steal your joy, your compassion, your belief in the goodness of people." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "But how can I trust anyone again? How can I know who to believe?" "You can't," Captain Calloway said softly. "There are no guarantees in life, Evelyn. Especially not in war. But you can't live in fear. You can't let the darkness consume you." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You have to trust your instincts, Evelyn. Trust your heart. Trust the people who have shown you kindness, who have proven their loyalty." He paused, his gaze intense and unwavering. "Trust me." Evelyn's heart ached. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe in him. But the fear, the doubt, the lingering shadows of betrayal held her back. I don't know, James," she whispered, her voice trembling.
"I'm afraid."
He squeezed her hand, his touch reassuring. "I know you are. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I'll help you. We'll face this together." His words, his presence, his unwavering love began to chip away at the walls around her heart. Slowly, gradually, she began to open up, to share her fears, her doubts, her pain. She realized that he was right. She couldn't let Beatrice's actions define her. She couldn't let the darkness win. She had to find a way to heal, to move forward, to reclaim her life. She started to spend more time with the other nurses, to engage in conversations, to offer her help and support. She began to smile again, to laugh, to find joy in the small, everyday moments. She also started to trust Captain Calloway, to fully embrace the love that had blossomed between them. She realized that he was her rock, her anchor, her source of strength and hope. One evening, as they were walking through the hospital garden, Evelyn stopped and turned to Captain Calloway, her eyes filled with a newfound clarity and determination. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "For everything. For saving my life, for believing in me, for helping me to heal." He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his face. "You don't have to thank me, Evelyn. I love you, and I'll always be here for you." He leaned in and kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that sealed their bond, their commitment, their love. It was a kiss that spoke of healing, of hope, of a future together, a future free from the shadows of betrayal. The heart's reckoning was a slow, arduous process. But with him by her side, she knew she would make it. Chapter 16. Into the Lion's Denver. With the immediate threat of Nightingale neutralized and Evelyn's gradual emotional recovery underway, a new challenge presented itself. Captain Calloway, despite still being on the mend, was summoned back to headquarters. The intelligence unit, reeling from the recent betrayal, needed his expertise, his experience, his insights to help rebuild and restructure. The summons was both an honor and a burden. It was a recognition of Captain Calloway's skills, his dedication, his unwavering commitment to the war effort. But it also meant leaving Evelyn behind, returning to the dangerous world of espionage, facing the very real possibility of never seeing her again. He wrestled with the decision, torn between his duty and his desire. He knew he couldn't refuse the summons, that his country needed him. But the thought of leaving Evelyn, of putting her at risk, even indirectly, filled him with dread. He confided in Evelyn, sharing his concerns, his fears, his conflicting emotions. She listened patiently, her heart aching for him, understanding the weight of the decision he faced. "You have to go, James," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "You can't turn your back on your duty. Your country needs you." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "But what about you, Evelyn? I can't leave you here, not after everything that's happened." She smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "I'll be all right, James. I'm stronger than you think. And I'll be waiting for you, right here." He knew she was right. He couldn't protect her forever. He had to trust her, to believe in her resilience, her ability to cope. But he couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the premonition of danger that lingered in the back of his mind. He knew that returning to headquarters, to the intelligence unit, was like walking into the lion's den. There were still unanswered questions, unresolved issues, potential threats lurking in the shadows. He decided to take a precaution, a measure of protection for Evelyn. He contacted Major Finch, who had recovered from his injuries and was now back at his post. He explained the situation, his concerns, his fears. He asked Finch to keep an eye on Evelyn, to protect her, to ensure her safety. Finch readily agreed, understanding the gravity of the situation. He promised to do everything in his power to safeguard Evelyn, to keep her out of harm's way. With a heavy heart, Captain Calloway prepared for his departure. He spent his last few hours with Evelyn, stealing precious moments together, sharing whispered confidences, reaffirming their love. They walked through the hospital garden, hand in hand, their silence punctuated by the distant sounds of war. They spoke of the future, of their dreams, of the life they hoped to build together after the conflict ended. "I'll come back for you, Evelyn," Captain Calloway said, his voice firm and unwavering. "I promise. And then we'll leave all this behind. We'll find a place, a peaceful place, where we can be together." Evelyn smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "I'll be waiting, James. I'll always be waiting." They kissed, a long, passionate kiss that sealed their promise, their commitment, their love. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and fear, of promises and uncertainties. Then, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the gathering darkness. Evelyn watched him go, her heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and pride. She knew he had to go, that his duty called. But she also knew that a part of her went with him, that her life would never be the same without him. She just hoped, prayed that he was right, and that he would, indeed, return. The lion's den awaited, and Evelyn could only wait and hope. Chapter 17. A love worth fighting for. Captain Calloway's return to headquarters was met with a mixture of relief and apprehension. His colleagues welcomed him back, grateful for his expertise and experience. But they also knew that his return meant delving back into the dangerous world of espionage, facing the potential for further betrayal and loss. The intelligence unit was in a state of disarray, shaken by the recent events, struggling to rebuild trust and restore morale. Captain Calloway immediately immersed himself in the work, analyzing reports, interviewing agents, assessing threats. He worked tirelessly, driven by a sense of duty and a burning desire to protect his country and Evelyn. He discovered that the investigation into Dubois's network was far from over. There were still loose ends, unanswered questions, potential collaborators who had yet to be identified. The threat of further sabotage, of further betrayal, loomed large. Captain Calloway focused his efforts on uncovering the full extent of Du Bois's network, identifying any remaining agents who might be operating within the Allied command. He meticulously reviewed files, cross-referenced information, followed leads. He soon discovered a pattern, a series of coded messages that had been intercepted but not yet deciphered. The messages were similar in style to the one Evelyn had found in the obituary, suggesting a common source, a connection to Du Bois. Captain Calloway, drawing on his experience and his knowledge of cryptography, began to work on deciphering the messages. He spent hours poring over the texts, trying different keys, experimenting with various methods. Finally, after days of relentless effort, he cracked the code. The messages revealed a shocking truth. There was another traitor, a high-ranking officer within the British intelligence service, who had been working with Du Bois. This traitor, codenamed Phoenix, was even more dangerous, more elusive than Nightingale. Captain Calloway's blood ran cold. He had to identify Phoenix, and he had to do it quickly. The fate of the war, the lives of countless soldiers, depended on it. And, he thought grimly, it probably had implications for Evelyn's safety, too. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. He contacted Major Finch, his trusted colleague, and shared his findings. Finch, shocked by the revelation, immediately pledged his support. Together, they began to investigate, following the clues revealed in the deciphered messages. They narrowed down the list of suspects, focusing on officers who had access to sensitive information, who had exhibited suspicious behavior, who had any connection to Du Bois. The investigation was fraught with danger, with the constant threat of exposure, of betrayal. Captain Calloway knew that Phoenix was watching, waiting, ready to strike. He had to be careful, meticulous, and above all, discreet. As he delved deeper into the investigation, Captain Calloway found himself thinking more and more about Evelyn. He missed her terribly, her warmth, her compassion, her unwavering support. He longed to be with her, to hold her in his arms, to escape the darkness of the war. He knew that his love for her was a source of strength, a driving force that kept him going. He was fighting not only for his country, but for her, for their future together. He had promised her he would return, and he was determined to keep that promise. He would stop Phoenix. He would protect Evelyn. He would win this war, for her. It was a love, he realized, truly worth fighting for. And fight he would. Chapter 18. The Scars That Bind Us. While Captain Calloway grappled with the Phoenix investigation, Evelyn, back at the field hospital, found herself facing a different kind of battle. The emotional scars of Beatrice's betrayal continued to haunt her, making it difficult to trust, to form new connections, to fully embrace the healing process. She threw herself into her work, caring for the wounded soldiers, finding solace in the routine, in the tangible act of helping others. But the memories lingered, the doubts persisted, the fear of further betrayal remained. Major Finch, true to his promise to Captain Calloway, kept a watchful eye on Evelyn, offering his support, his friendship, his unwavering loyalty. He understood her pain, her struggle, her need for reassurance. He spent time with her, talking to her, listening to her, sharing his own experiences of the war. He reminded her of her strength, her resilience, her unwavering compassion. He helped her to see that not everyone was like Beatrice, that there were still good people in the world, people who could be trusted. Evelyn, he said one evening, as they sat together in the hospital garden, you can't let one person's actions define your entire life. You can't let the darkness win. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. I know, Major. But it's hard. It's like a part of me has been broken.
It has, Finch agreed gently.
But broken things can be mended, Evelyn. Scars may remain, but they can also be a reminder of strength, of survival, of the battles you've overcome. He paused, his gaze shifting towards the distant horizon. We all have scars, Evelyn. Some are visible, some are hidden. But they are a part of who we are. They tell our stories. They remind us of what we've been through, and what we're capable of. His words resonated with Evelyn, offering a new perspective, a glimmer of hope. She realized that he was right. Her scars, both physical and emotional, were not a sign of weakness, but a testament to her resilience, her ability to survive, her capacity for healing. She began to slowly open up, to share her fears, her doubts, her pain with Major Finch. She found comfort in his presence, in his unwavering support, in his genuine friendship. She also started to reconnect with the other nurses, to rebuild the relationships that had been damaged by Beatrice's betrayal. She realized that she couldn't isolate herself forever, that she needed human connection, that she needed to trust again. One evening, as she was working in the ward, she saw a new patient being brought in, a young soldier with a severe head injury. He was unconscious, his face pale and still, his breathing shallow and uneven. Evelyn rushed to his side, her medical training kicking in. She quickly assessed his injuries, her hands moving with a practiced efficiency. She knew she had to act fast, to save his life. As she worked, she felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of purpose. She was a nurse, a healer, a protector. And she would not let this young man die. She worked tirelessly for hours, doing everything she could to stabilize him, to keep him alive. And finally, after what seemed like an eternity, his breathing became more regular, his pulse stronger, his color returning. He was going to live. Evelyn collapsed onto a nearby chair, exhausted but exhilarated. She had done it. She had saved another life. And in that moment, she realized that she had also saved herself. She had found her way back to the light, to the purpose, to the passion that had defined her before the darkness had crept in. The scars remained, a permanent part of her. But they no longer defined her. They were a reminder of the battles she had fought, the challenges she had overcome, the love she had found. They were the scars that bound her to Captain Calloway, to Major Finch, to the wounded soldiers she cared for, to the life she had chosen. And they were, she realized, a testament to her strength, her resilience, her unwavering spirit. She was healing, slowly, painfully but surely. Chapter 19. When Tomorrow Never Comes. The investigation into Phoenix proved to be a complex and dangerous undertaking. Captain Calloway and Major Finch, working in tandem, meticulously pieced together the fragments of evidence, following a trail of coded messages, intercepted communications, and suspicious activities. They narrowed down the list of suspects, focusing on a handful of high-ranking officers who had access to sensitive information and had exhibited questionable behavior. The tension was palpable, the stakes incredibly high. They knew that Phoenix was aware of their investigation, that he was watching their every move, waiting for an opportunity to strike. They had to be careful, discreet, and above all, quick. As they delved deeper into the investigation, they uncovered a plot of staggering proportions. Phoenix was not only feeding information to the enemy, but he was also actively sabotaging Allied operations, planning a major offensive that could cripple the Allied forces and potentially turn the tide of the war. The planned offensive was scheduled to take place in a matter of days, targeting a key strategic location near the front lines. Captain Calloway and Major Finch knew they had to act fast to expose Phoenix and prevent the attack. They gathered their evidence, preparing to present their findings to the highest authorities. But they also knew that Phoenix had powerful allies, that he would not go down without a fight. They decided to take a preemptive strike, to confront Phoenix directly, to force his hand. They arranged a meeting, using a coded message similar to the ones Phoenix had been using, luring him into a trap. The meeting was set to take place at a secluded location, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Captain Calloway and Major Finch, armed and prepared, waited for Phoenix to arrive. The tension was unbearable, the silence punctuated only by the sound of their own breathing, the distant rumble of artillery fire. And then he arrived. Phoenix. A figure Captain Calloway recognized, a face he had seen many times before, a man he had once considered a colleague, a friend. It was General Sir Arthur Billingsley, the head of British intelligence. The revelation was a shock, a blow to the gut that left Captain Calloway reeling. Billingsley, the man who had overseen the entire intelligence operation, the man who had been entrusted with the most sensitive secrets, was a traitor. Billingsley, Captain Calloway said, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. It's you. You're Phoenix. Billingsley smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent a shiver down Captain Calloway's spine. Indeed, Captain. And I must say, you've been quite persistent. A nuisance, really. Why, Billingsley? Captain Calloway demanded. Why would you betray your country? Your men? For the greater good, Captain, Billingsley replied, his voice dripping with arrogance. For a new world order. For a future free from the chaos and destruction of this pointless war. You're delusional, Captain Calloway said, his voice trembling with rage. You're a traitor, a murderer, a disgrace to your uniform. Billingsley laughed, a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed through the warehouse. Sentimentality, Captain? How disappointing. I expected more from you. He raised his hand, signaling to a group of hidden soldiers who emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on Captain Calloway and Major Finch. It seems our little meeting has come to an end, Billingsley said, his voice smooth and menacing. I'm afraid I can't allow you to leave here alive. A firefight erupted, a fierce and desperate battle in the confines of the warehouse. Captain Calloway and Major Finch, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the courage and determination of men who had nothing to lose. The warehouse was filled with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and the screams of dying men. Captain Calloway, despite his weakened condition, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a burning desire to protect Evelyn, to fulfill his promise to her. But the odds were stacked against them. Major Finch was shot, falling to the ground, his body riddled with bullets. Captain Calloway, seeing his friend fall, felt a surge of rage and despair. He continued to fight, his heart pounding, his lungs burning, his body aching. But he knew it was hopeless. He was surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned.
He was going to die.
He closed his eyes, a picture of Evelyn's face flashing before him. He whispered her name, a silent prayer, a final farewell. And then, he heard a voice, a familiar voice, shouting his name. James. He opened his eyes, his vision blurred. He saw a figure running towards him, dodging bullets, her face filled with determination and fear. It was Evelyn. She had come. Against all odds, against all reason, she had come. But how?
And why?
It didn't matter. She was here. And he knew, with a sinking heart, that this was the end. For both of them. Tomorrow, it seemed, would never come. Chapter 20. The Final Farewell. Evelyn's arrival at the warehouse was a desperate gamble, a reckless act of love and loyalty. She had received a cryptic message from Major Finch, a single word, warehouse. She knew instantly that something was wrong, that Captain Calloway was in danger. She had disobeyed orders, left the hospital, and raced to the location, her heart pounding with fear and a desperate hope. She had found the warehouse, heard the sounds of gunfire, and without hesitation, plunged into the chaos, determined to save the man she loved. Seeing Captain Calloway surrounded by enemy soldiers, on the verge of death, filled her with a surge of adrenaline, a fierce determination to protect him. She had no weapon, no training, no plan. Only her love, her courage, and her unwavering belief in him. She ran towards him, dodging bullets, her voice shouting his name. She saw the surprise on his face, the mixture of relief and despair in his eyes. She reached him, throwing herself in front of him, shielding him from the gunfire. A bullet struck her, a searing pain that ripped through her body. She stumbled, falling to her knees, her vision blurring. Captain Calloway caught her, his arms wrapping around her, his face filled with horror and anguish. "Evelyn," he cried, his voice choked with emotion.
Why?
"Why did you come?" She smiled, a weak, trembling smile. "I couldn't let you die alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I love you." Her body went limp, her eyes closing. Captain Calloway held her close, his tears streaming down his face, his heart shattering into a million pieces. He cradled her in his arms, whispering her name, begging her to stay with him, to not leave him. But it was too late. She was gone. The firefight continued around him, but he was oblivious to it. He had lost everything. His love, his hope, his future. All gone in a single, devastating moment. Billingsley, seeing his opportunity, approached Captain Calloway, his pistol raised, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer. "A touching scene, Captain," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "But I'm afraid it's time to end this." He aimed his pistol at Captain Calloway's head, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a shot rang out. Billingsley stumbled, his eyes widening in surprise, his body collapsing to the ground. Standing behind him, a smoking pistol in his hand, was Major Finch. He had survived, his injury severe but not fatal. He had crawled unnoticed through the chaos and had managed to get a clear shot at Billingsley. The remaining enemy soldiers, seeing their leader fall, surrendered. The battle was over. Captain Calloway, still holding Evelyn's lifeless body in his arms, felt a wave of grief wash over him, a crushing despair that threatened to consume him. He had lost her. He had failed her. Major Finch approached him, his face filled with sorrow and compassion. He knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, James," he said softly.
I'm so sorry.
Captain Calloway didn't respond. He couldn't speak.
He couldn't think.
He could only hold Evelyn, his tears falling onto her face, his heart broken beyond repair. The final farewell had come, and it was more devastating, more heartbreaking than he could ever have imagined. The war had taken everything from him, everything except the memories, the scars, the love that would forever remain etched in his soul. This ending, he knew, was the one they had both feared and fought against from the very beginning. Epilogue. The war ended, not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a weary sigh of relief, a collective exhale from a world that had held its breath for far too long. The guns fell silent. The battlefields lay still. The soldiers returned home, scarred and broken, to a world that had changed forever. Captain James Calloway returned to Scotland, to the rugged highlands he had spoken of so often with Evelyn. He carried with him the weight of his grief, the burden of his loss, the enduring memory of the woman he had loved and lost. He built a small cottage overlooking a loch, a secluded, peaceful place where he could try to find some solace, some measure of healing. He spent his days walking the hills, fishing in the loch, reading the books that Evelyn had loved. He never forgot her. He never stopped loving her. He kept her memory alive, a flickering flame in the darkness of his heart. He visited her grave often, a simple stone marker in a quiet churchyard near Amiens where she had been laid to rest. He would talk to her, sharing his thoughts, his feelings, his enduring love. He never remarried. He never found another love. Evelyn had been his one true love, his soulmate, his guiding star. And he knew that he would never find another like her. He lived a long life, a quiet life, a life filled with both sadness and a quiet, enduring gratitude. He had survived the war. He had found love. He had experienced the beauty and the fragility of life. He often thought about the obituary, the premonition that had brought them together, the coded message that had led them on a dangerous journey, the love that had blossomed amidst the chaos of war. He realized that fate, destiny, whatever one might call it, was a mysterious and unpredictable force. It could bring joy and sorrow, hope and despair, love and loss. But it could also bring people together, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. He kept the silver locket that he had given to Evelyn, a tangible reminder of their love, a symbol of their shared journey. He wore it always, close to his heart, a constant reminder of the woman who had changed his life forever. And as he grew old, as his time drew near, he found comfort in the thought that he would soon be reunited with her, that they would finally be together, beyond the reach of war, beyond the pain and suffering, in a place of peace and eternal love. He died quietly, in his sleep, a smile on his lips, the silver locket clutched in his hand. He had lived a full life, a life marked by both tragedy and triumph, by loss and love. And he had finally found peace. He went to her, leaving the world behind, to a place where war and loss held no sway. Only love remained.